Hi everyone. I'm Caleb, and I'm a front-end developer, and I'm a technical writer also. Currently, I lead the Google Developer Student Clubs community on my campus in Nigeria. So I'm going to be talking about how we're going to protect our API keys on the client side of Jamstack applications. So Jamstack applications are just like basically front-end applications that interface with APIs. So there's no need for a backend. So I think the reason for this talk is uh, just more like I'm sharing the story of how I went through a process of trying to use an API. Then I needed an API key to actually access some of the features. So I was having an issue with protecting the API key. So the API key is needed for me to be able to like get results from the API endpoint. So I was discovering that whenever I push this project to production, I'm using Netlify to what's it called to host it. So whenever I push it to Netlify, I find out that none of this is working, and um, locally when I'm running to my local environment, it's working fine. Then a question comes out like, oh, this is working locally. Why isn't it working in production? So I was really pissed, and wow, I felt like crying. So but I didn't cry. So moving on. So a lot of people will be like, yeah, I'll just make use of an environment variable to like keep my API key and store it. Yeah, that's just the word, store it. So most of the time it's not limited to the environment variable. And from the world itself, the environment variable um is limited to the environment that you're currently in. So it works when you're working locally on your machine. So and Jamstack applications are like client-side application, and the environment variable it's like a Node.js a Node.js environment. So it works in a Node.js environment, and the browser itself is um, doesn't get access to this global variable that Node.js provides. So when you push your project to production, you realize that this environment variable you most of the times do not see it, or sometimes it is there, but people who actually have an idea of how to manipulate or maneuver their way around the developer tools of their browsers. They can get access to this, and you know how painful that can be when someone is making use of your API key. So when I first placed when I first placed my API key in an environment variable, the picture in the next slide shows how I felt. I felt so proud of myself. Like I was feeling so happy that yeah, I've protected this and nothing can ever happen to the environment variable. So but little did I know that it's not actually doing what I wanted it to do, because sometimes some APIs, the backend of some APIs, they've set up something like they call it cross origin resource sharing. So you need to be able to like perform some calls from the server side, and Jamstack applications do not actually perform server side calls. So that's when we now begin to like introduce Next.js in this talk, but let's hold on till we get there. So there are actually other options to what's it called to make sure that your environment variables are actually available on the client side for you to be able to use. So you can make use of when you're using Netlify, you can make use of the Netlify dashboard, and there's a section in the UI that allows you to actually place your environment variable inside um, to insert it into your code and all of that. But the trade-off is that anybody can actually access it and they can still make use of your API key. So that doesn't actually solve anything. So we can use Netlify Lambda functions. I think the thing that really took me away from this approach was because I had to like write a lot of code to actually get this particular thing done. And I was like, oh, why do I have to go through this stress to achieve this simple thing? So then my research, what's it called? I kicked into my research mode and I started searching and searching and searching. I think it took me almost like 2 weeks, I guess, to actually find a proper solution to this. So, and there's this video I came across on YouTube where a Jenma Omwuzulike explained how to like use server-side rendering with Next.js to write API keys. Yeah, that approach is very nice, but it required me to like write a lot of things, and you might not you a beginner will not be like totally gets the concept of it. Like the whole process is way big. So I was thrown off away from that approach. So I went on. I started doing some diggings and all of that. So let's move on to the next slide. So then I came across Next.js API routes. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. So Next.js API routes, it's more like a feature of Next.js that allows you, for example, for backend engineers, Next.js API route presents a solution for them to be able to like build their APIs with Next.js and the same code base. Over the time, as I work, I as I've been working on projects with people, I discovered that backend engineers they have to like create a separate repository for their APIs, and they have to like deploy it or host it to platforms like Heroku and the like. But using the Next.js API route, you can have your APIs as a backend engineer in the same code base as the front end interface. So the stress of having to like host your APIs on another platform is gone. So with Next.js API route, the backend engineers and the front end engineers can work together collaboratively to actually get things done. So there's no need of splitting repositories and splitting code bases. So everything can actually be done inside a particular code base. All right. So for front end engineers, on the other hand, the Next.js API route enables us to be able to consume an API or an API endpoint on the server side. So that I mentioned server side consumption of APIs the other time. So the idea behind the server side consumption is when you have to protect the API key. Yeah, one of the example is like to protect the API key. So you're building Jamstack applications and the API key is going to be reviewed or is going to be exposed on what's it called in the browser. So anybody that has an idea of how to like use the developer tools of your browser or their browser, they can have access to this what's it called to the API key that you're using. So Next.js API route provides that opportunity for you to like use consume the API endpoint or the APIs on the server side. So okay, I said almost all of this. So front-end code can be accessed with the dev tools of our browsers. Since that is possible, your API keys are not safe. They can be accessed by anybody that knows how to open the dev tools of the browser. So, yeah, they need to write server-side API calls. So in the next slide, we'll be looking at some code examples and how they actually function. I'll be doing most of the explanations there. So bear with me. So I think Next.js is quite popular. So a lot of people have used. I think, yeah, I'm not going to say majority, but I know that quite a number of people are familiar with Next.js. So if you're not familiar with Next.js, like this is just like the concise structure of a Next.js app. So it's way more than this. So we have the pages. The pages folder has like an API directory. So the API directory, like that is where the API route is. That's where the API endpoints are actually located. So if you want to like perform probably an API call, you just do something like if you're using Axios or you're using um, the native fetch API in JavaScript, you can just do fetch API, then to be / the API route, then the file inside um, the API folder. All right. So the server side API call function. So in the next slide, you notice that I created a function, a user function that accepts two parameters. So I don't know if we have backend engineers presently on this call. So this whatever you be seeing in the next slide will be very similar to how it is being done. I think I've seen how backend engineers like they write Express they use Express and not just like write APIs and to create API functions to create API routes to redirect people or users to a particular section of the page and all. So the function accepts two parameters, the rec and the res. So the rec is just like the short form of request, and res is the short form of response. So these parameters are needed in the exported user function. Like I said, the request represents an instance of data that is sent to the API or an endpoint of the API. So the response represents the object that is gotten from the successful API call. So so basically, this is what the server-side API call looks like. So we have the function that shows the users that takes in two parameters, the request and the response. So Next.js API route provides what's it called? Some middlewares that comes with it. So that's why you see that we destructured the query to the first name and the last name, and we assigned it to the request parameter. So the idea behind the user function is why we're taking the first name and the last name as parameters or as properties inside the query that we destructured. At the end of this thing is because we're trying to like get data from a form. So the form is having two input fields, the first name and the last name. So that's why we're destructuring the query to the first name and the last name. So the base URL is just going to hold your what's it called? The API, the base URL of the API. So if your API is having you're trying to like send a query to the API endpoint, that's when you now pass in the variables that we stored as properties of the query parameter. So you pass them as variables to the query that you're making. And if you notice, we still have the API key being accessed with the process global variable of Node.js. So we're assuming that you're going to have a process an environment variable called key. So you are accessing it with the process.env.key. So the response is gotten from the you're assigning it to Axios. You're saying await Axios, and you're getting it's like you're creating a default fetch request, but you're using Axios instead. So you're using Axios that gets to pass in the base URL. So then you pass in the response parameter and you access the status like their HTTP response codes. So Tron, if the status like if the response you're getting from the API endpoint is okay, then you're getting the 200 status code. So when you get that status code, then you assign it to a JSON object called data. So then you pass the variable called response and pass it to the data also. So that basically sums up like what the API server-side function looks like. Yeah, that basically just sums it up. So going further into the idea of the Next.js API route. So any file that goes into the API folder is automatically represented as the API slash the file name. So as I was explaining before, so if you try to do axios.get, it will be axios.get API slash the name of the file. That means, yeah, the name of the file that you're trying to like the name of the file where you wrote your server side function. So you don't need to like put in the normal HTTPS example blah 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 link to the API.com. Understand? So that means that okay, yeah, that means that when you start the dev server and you navigate to HTTPS, like if you normally originally if you using Next.js, when you run npm run dev, when you do npm run dev rather, the server gets started at the port 3000, so localhost port 3000. So if you go to / API / the file name, you will get the response in your browser. So I just want to go back to like show you uh, something here. So if you come down below data and you do console.log data, you will be getting the response on in your browser, rather the JSON response in your browser. Okay. So to make everything practical now, we're going to try and interact with the form components. So normally a React form is basically it goes in this structure. So we have the local state of the result that is gotten from the API call. That's the data that we're trying to get, and we pass it into an array. Then we have the variable. So just to make this illustration shorter, that's why I'm using just one input field. So we're using only the first name. So that I'll be able to like show you this code snippet. Yeah. So we have the form that takes in the attributes of the onSubmit, and it takes in the event handler, which we're going to see in the next slide. So it takes in the input, and you see that the value is assigned to the first name state variable that we use React hook to declare. So on change, resets, it's basically just creating a form. So I guess most of you are familiar with creating a form in React with React hooks. So, so in the previous slide, we have two state variables, data, first name, and first name created with the use the React hook. The value prop of the input field is passed as an argument to the query parameter in the server-side API call, which I guess you've seen when we like when I was explaining the server-side function before. Awesome. So then we come here to create the function itself, the server-side function that that we're going to use to like get the results or the data from the API endpoint. So you notice that we still have we just had to like replace, we tweaked a little things, like just little things there. So we have the Axios or get. So instead of doing the normal Axios or get and you put in the link to the API endpoint, that will not be necessary. The API route in Nextjs has taken care of that for us. So you just come there and put it in you use template literals in JavaScript to so that we're able to like pass in the state variables into the query that you're sending to the API. So you notice that we have API/users. That's the name of the file inside the API routes that we created. I was showing you the first time when I was explaining the Next.js API, the Next.js app structure. So then we pass in the headers to accept the application/JSON. Then you use the then method to set the data to the to be equal to response of data, the data. No. Then the undo submit will take in um, the prevent default method also that allows you to that allows the browser not to refresh whenever you send or whenever you try to like get an API result or something. Yeah. Then you pass in the get user function also. So get user data is the API function that utilizes the Axios library to send a get request of the input values to the API endpoint. So you notice that the URL, like I said before, you know that the URL of the API endpoint has changed from the normal hypertext link to a path-like URL API/users, then the query, the first name that will receive a string, and the last name also that will receive a string. This is as a result of the feature of Nextjs API routes. Oh, I guess that's all. So I have some useful link to resources. So the first one, I think maybe if you need the slide after this whole call, I'll share it with you. So the first one is like an article that I wrote to show a practical use of the Next.js API route. So at the end of this call, if you need the link to it, I'll share it with you. And you can also go ahead to Next.js, to the Next.js documentation to read about Next.js API routes. And you can read about the API route middlewares. The middleware, the one of the middlewares that we saw was the query middleware, and we also have the rec and the response middlewares that Next.js API route provides for us to be able to like create server-side API calls that we can use to like protect our API keys. So wow, I guess I'm done. So thank you for listening to my talk. I hope it has helped you understand a little bit about protecting your API keys in using Next.js API routes.